Recording. Alright, Duvato. Alright, we're gonna actually do Dorado. I don't know, we're gonna do the same thing that we've been doing. Second point, high ground. High ground. High ground, high ground. I'm just gonna keep, like, when you guys watch back at what we've already done, and when you watch them all together, if you, like, rewatch them or anything like that, is gonna be a common theme. Second point is very high ground centric on many, many maps where there's multiple points. It's very good for dive. It's very good for, trying to hold that high ground and stuff like that. So first point is going to be super duper interesting. I feel like I did a review of Dorado. I'm gonna look back and maybe see if I could post it. If I did do it, but I'm gonna try to keep this brief because we're down to about like 20 more minutes before we have to start getting into like scrim time, basically. All right. So Dorado, these first two corners are almost worthless to you as defenders. And that's because there's just no good real place for everybody to hold. High ground is okay, but... Sorry, my throat hurts. High ground is okay, but it has a lot of flank routes. It's very, very open. It's holdable if you have a bunker type defense, but it's maybe not the most optimal to run a bunker type defense on Dorado, given how many counters there are to it. Whether it's Lucio riding along the skybox and booping you off, or a Winston kind of, bubbling on top of you and dealing a bunch of zap damage till he gets primal and then just absolutely ruining your day. Or the fact that people could just turtle on cart and push underneath you. But either way, this first point is going to be a little bit of kind of like a foregone conclusion for most compositions. Now, the only composition that can... I think Dorado is the only map that dive can run the entire time. This is such a good dive-esque map. And really what it comes down to is it's really good for Winston and D.Va. And Hammond too, to be fair. Where you have all of these different high grounds where if we kind of... I don't know how high we can go. I don't know what the skybox is on this map. Oh, that's sad. Can I... Thank you. Okay. So we have like this high grounds up here. We have this high ground up here. We have this high ground up here. And these are just the first two corners where it's like they can all look down at the cart. So you can have your Winston stage from like really any of these high grounds and drop down and do different things. So I think it's probably best to be able to run Winston on defense. I think this is just a dive centric map. So part of the problem with that is going to be that our dive, just in terms of organization, is not the best. Dive is a very fast and fluid composition where you go from one thing to the next, and it's very like you're very, very passive, you're hiding, and then you're jumping on someone together very quickly. So I think in terms of coordination, we're gonna have to kind of work on it. The main thing that we have to start with if we're running anything dive centric is that there's going to be certain characters who have to get into position first. If you're running something like a Tracer on this map where the enemies are holding a high ground, you have to give the Tracer time to get in position so that when the Monkey dives in, because he can move vertically, the Tracer can just follow him up with damage and stuff like that. So the Reaper can, follow him up if he wants to get in position first. So we want to make sure that with our dives, the very least, we can't peek during those setup times because there's no poke really in dive that's worth it. There's very few dive characters who are also good at poke. And most of the time they're like not really dive characters. They can work with dive. Like Widow is not a dive character, but she works with dive. Pharah is not a dive character, but she works with dive. They have great poke. Greedy? Try me. Where's the dive? You gonna grapple into them?
Yeah.
You toxic. Okay, so yeah, no, you just have to give everybody time to set up and stuff like that. But on defense, it's generally going to be for if you're running a dive type strategy, you're going to be holding these high grounds, dropping down. It's going to be very similar tank rotations the entire time. Supports can start on this high ground with DPS that have either long range hit scan or, you can like start with your Reaper up here, similar to the Monkey, drop down with him, have a Genji poking. You can have your Pharah kind of sitting next to this bell tower, just kind of putting down damage and floating around and stuff like that. You can make rotations around and get a better angle actually, and putting down damage and stuff like that as Pharah, because this isn't the worst Pharah map all things considered. So there's a lot of value that you can get out of this map, out of holding the high ground and stuff like that. But let's take, for instance, if for some reason, let's say they're running like fucking Reaper May, and our Winston is just getting absolutely smacked, and we go 3-3 and it's overtime and we have to make an adjustment, right? Very specific niche situation, I understand, but you never know. You never know. And we have to run Reinhardt. As Reinhardt, the first two corners, worthless. As Orisa, first two corners, worthless. Your tanks can't hold there. So you actually have to hold this high ground and poke damage until they're like, let's say if they're halfway to here, like once they get to this point, almost at the green billboard, you're going to then have to make a rotation down the stairs so that your tanks can hold choke while your supports wind up holding back here, or off to the side, maybe slated a little bit over here, and then your DPS fan out wherever they need to fan. So you have your Ashe, you put your Widow, you put you plop your Junkrat over here. You stage your Pharah. She like floats here and spins in a circle or whatever. Every DPS has their own kind of like niche positioning. To be clear, Pharah would be up on these roof tops, not spinning on the fountain. Just to make sure you guys know that was a joke. But yeah, so we're gonna forego those first two corners if we're running a Rhine composition, and then like I said, supports, give them space, let them tank, try to give them sight lines, and we have to keep track of two things for them while they hold that choke. The first is going to be this bridge up here. This is usually going to be like a Widowmaker's job if we have it, but if we don't have a Widowmaker, then we're going to have other people kind of like checking this bridge to make sure that people can't shoot over the tanks into our squishies. And the other thing is going to be this flank angle over here, making sure that we are not letting just Reapers walk into our backline or anything like that, or letting Genji just free farm or whatever by taking that other staircase. Now, I'm sure all of you know about this, but this is just another thing that you have to keep an idea on. So, this leads into kind of attacking theories and stuff like that. What I think we should do, largely, is run Winston as our main tank, and then play something that can take use of high ground and take control of high ground. Ashe, Genji, Pharah, Widowmaker, things that can have vertical mobility in some capacity or another, to be able to get up there and follow up with the monkey and actually do damage when he bubbles a certain area. Because a lot of what it's going to come down to is, like, let's say on second point, where it's going to become extremely difficult to push if we don't do it properly, is there's the chance that they're going to hold up here and they're going to have a very strong dive centric strategy that starts from up here. We're going to have our monkey jump up here, but he's not going to be enough to contest this area on his own. He's going to need follow-up damage that supplements his ability to tank and just take aggro and stuff like that, you know? And sometimes the second point is going to become predicated on things like that. So when we're attacking, you know, I think it'd be good to kind of have that type of strategy where we're pushing by taking high ground and then attacking from the high ground. So it's going to be like a two-stage attack. Take the next available high ground or contest the next available high ground, clear the low ground underneath it. And it's going to be it should be very methodical, where it's like, where's the next high ground that I can easily access and contest? Go contest it. Clear the low ground. Low ground clear, go contest the next one. Low ground clear, go contest the next one. Now, this is just going to be a niche strategy, but you can sim TP over this. If you are getting hard stuck at the choke, I suggest that you do a sim TP over this. I think it's fun. Essentially, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go wide right side, like together. You're going to want to come out of this spawn door as a team, and you're going to want to just go way wide right side so that they have no idea where you are, up the stairs, and just TP over the wall. And then attack them from surprise from behind. Generally, you're going to want to run a brawl composition with it if you're going to do something like that, because you're going to be very suddenly like in on top of the enemies. So, you know, like you would swap onto Reaper and Rhine Zarya and, you know, maybe Lucio Moira, so that you can make the rotation faster and sustain longer. So that's first point. First point is really the most intricate. Second point, pretty straightforward. Control the high ground. This right side is going to be the shorter path that you could take if you're trying to get to the cart that's close. And it's actually going to be a pretty important flank angle for when you have ultimates. So on the defense, you're going to want to be pretty aware of this. So the first part of this streets phase is going to come down to this high ground right here, and controlling this high ground and controlling the space under it. This is the church, chapel, whatever you want to call it. This space over here is the bank. See, it says bank. But this second point right here, these second corners that you're going to come to, is going to kind of come down to both of the high grounds being controlled. So you're going to want to have somebody over here who can maybe face check this sight line and make sure that they're putting pressure all the way down. But you also might want to have somebody over here who's checking this sight line. And this might come down to both the DPS, making sure that one is on each high ground respectively, putting pressure down these sight lines, and then being able to put pressure onto point once they have affirmed that the sight lines are cleared. We want to be aware of these windows for kind of like Widow perches. If we're running something like a Widow, you know, like you could put the Widow on the left side high ground over here, but then the Widow has the option to drop to try to change the angle that the duel is coming from and stuff like that. So just various different things like this can be used to our advantage. Third point, there's going to be, Jesus Christ, I think I'm talking too fast because I'm getting lightheaded, I'm not gonna lie.
Chill out, coach.
I gotta go faster. I gotta go faster. I gotta go faster, man.
It hasn't even started yet.
It's okay. It's okay. I've done worse. Alright. Breathe. Okay.
Wait for drink.
I had a sip of water. Okay, so this last one can really be the only point that's Brawl-esque. You can run Brawl on this with just, like, this is just normal, like, Brawl. So, like, you have your corner for your tanks, you have your corner for your tanks, you have your corner for your tanks, you have this pillar if your tanks want to use it. Like, you have different spots that you can jump from. And two, you can actually just take the high ground and then drop from high ground as a Brawl composition. But it also works for dive. So if we're feeling like Monkey is going to be something that we want to run, you know, this high ground is going to be your main staging area for Monkey, and you're going to want to control all of the low ground around it by controlling this high ground. This is going to require you to be aware of people who are coming up to the high ground through this long and convoluted walkway. And making sure that if a Reaper comes up here that you're dropping and not, you know, feeding to him or anything like that. But if anybody else is coming up here that you're contesting him, the main problem if we run dive is just that, you know, we won't be able to contest the high ground as freely if we're running a Rein, Zarya, Rein, Hog or something like that. So this is something that we should really be aware of. I'm going to get into generalities here since most of you guys are here. So for Shadow and Greedy, this is something for you guys to be aware of. When the tanks do not have vertical mobility and there is some high ground to be accessed, it then becomes your responsibility to contest the high ground in some capacity. And that doesn't mean that you have to be on the high ground. Usually it's better to be on the high ground, but that at the very least means that you have to be aware that it is there, occasionally checking it, and contesting the people who are up there by shooting at them or poking them down or something like that. So as DPS, we have to be aware that there are responsibilities that you will have that will fluctuate from game to game based off of what the rest of your team is doing. Because the rest of your team is going to provide the space and the comfort for you to be able to do your base job, which is to deal damage. But then you're going to have little auxiliary jobs that will change from game to game. Like I said, for here, it may be a matter of if Shadow, if you're running Ashe and we're running Rein Zarya, contest the high ground by just shooting back at people or shotgunning up there and controlling it beforehand or whatever. Like to ask for a mercy pocket so you can clear it properly. But what was it? There's going to also be other responsibilities sometimes. Like, for instance, Shadow, I think one of the things that you need to start working on is when people say, like, oh, there's somebody on me, that's not a tank or support responsibility only. You can peel as a DPS. You just have to kill the other person before they kill your support, which is doable depending on the support and the enemy DPS, really, but it's doable. So, like, we have to just be responsive to one another and aware of what responsibilities are, like, win conditions for the enemy team that we need to contest, and the high ground can be one of them.
And make it out alive.
Yeah, and make it out alive. That is going to be a very big thing. That's going to be something that I'm sure we're going to continue to adjust to over time, because as we play better and better people, and as we get better, the other people will get crazier, right? They're going to start hitting crazy shots. Because honestly, I don't think we're in that rank yet where people hit crazy shots. They just hit good, solid shots, and sometimes they pop off. Questions, comments, concerns, ideas? Alright, cool. So does everybody feel comfortable in some capacity or another with attacking and defending Dorado? Because I kind of gave a little bit of a brief overview, and I think it's going to make more sense as you go through the different videos, but do you kind of have a shambles? Is anybody lost? Let me say that.
Can you just repeat that last part? I just want to make sure I got everything for, just right here, this part.
Second point?
Yeah.
First part of second point or second part of second point?
Just second point in general.
Okay, so second point is going to be largely fragmented into 2 sections. These first 2 corners and then the last, or the first 3 corners and then the last corner. First 3 corners are going to be predicated by this high ground control mostly because it is such drastic high ground in the first place, but it's also directly looking down onto the rest of the cart's path. So you can use this to stage for tanks like Monkey, but you could also use this for purchase for different dives for, like, let's say Genji, you know, you drop down. As Widow, you have this nice on sight line if you're playing from back here. I gotta think through all the DPS and stuff like that now. As far you can kind of like shoot down from over here, Junkrat spam and whatnot. But this is going to be predicated on those singular high ground. For the second point, you're going to have 2 high ground that you really want to contest. Because for the attackers, and this is something you should be aware of for yourself as well, the attackers have a shorter path coming along this left side than they would the right side. Let's say if the cart was here or something like that. So we would probably want to have 1 DPS on each of the high grounds, contesting each of the high grounds available, and then also being able to put pressure on point when needed. So this would be kind of like the general formation. Like, let's say these are our DPS, and then we have our tanks holding here. Our supports would be further back under here, or maybe we would have like one of the, like an Ana back here, and then a Mercy up here would be another good position. Excuse me, because that would allow our DPS to get good healing too. Does that all make sense and everything?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns, ideas?
Nope.
All right. Cool. So I'm going to stop this recording.